Call Fletcher Tabato.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I just want to continue down the line of tax incentives for business. So originally the legislation spoke about incentivising research through tax write-offs. It is a tax remedial bill, and so we New Zealand First looked at that in some detail. What we found in our contributions, we noted the issue with that was it wasn't actually supporting 98% of New Zealand businesses. It seemed to disincentivise, or even more than that, prevent small to medium enterprise businesses from using the tax claim procedures so that they themselves could use the tax write-offs as an incentive to encourage research. It's a small part of it, and I acknowledge that the officials have done some work and we're moving in the right direction. So, but I just wanted to put some context in and around the bigger picture with research in New Zealand, Mr Chairman, because the slump in dairy prices of over 10% today just highlights New Zealand's hang-up with commodities. And so what we see is a kind of cycle, not just in New Zealand but around the world, where we invest and then we don't because the prices drop, and then there's fewer players in the market, so the prices go up, so we invest, and and so the vicious cycle goes on. And I know a lot of farmers in New Zealand are quite anxious about the intellectual property that has been sold to overseas dairy interests, and so we're kind of competing to provide the lowest price to the world market, and that model just can't carry on for an extended period of time. So what I'm saying to the House today is you have some very small and very micro opportunities here in terms of incentivising research, and the government needs to acknowledge and move our economy out of that commodity conundrum. I was looking at some research, and I'd like to bring it to the House's attention. New Zealand exported $50 billion worth of goods overseas in March. This year was the total for an annual number, 50 billion. Fantastic. It sounds fantastic. We're a population of 4.6 million people. If you contrast that with Singapore, sir, they exported $410 billion worth of goods or commodities. That's compared to us, about $10,500 a person. Singapore, $113,000 per person. The reality is then, I want to highlight the fact that they are an economy that incentivises research. They are meaningful about it, and they take it beyond the tax break. So only one of their top 10 exports is actually a commodity, and that just happens to be oil. The rest is, goods that have intellectual property in them. They are value added, and that is a conversation that has been having had in New Zealand for decades on so many of the products that we sell abroad, that value added conundrum. And I suggest, and I assert actually, that this legislation is just a tiny step in the right direction. R&D expenditure in New Zealand, for example, is 1.56% of GDP. That's tiny, and compared to the OECD average, it's about half of that. So we have real issues that need to be addressed. This is a start, as I've said a couple of times, and I'll make reference to some of the clauses that I'm referencing. So I'll speak specifically to 192, clause 192, the new subpart MX in the Income Tax Act 2007. As I said, we spoke consistently and strongly about the tax incentives needed for small to medium-sized businesses. We noted that the original drafting of the bill didn't even acknowledge small to medium businesses. Well, it did, but it didn't really give them the opportunity to write off those costs, because it was kind of post or after the fact, and a lot of them were running losses, and they weren't making the profit that would enable them to compensate, as it were, for those losses in terms of research. So the the section I'm speaking about, Mr. Chair, is MX4. It talks about applying a company is liable for an amount of R&D, Mr. Chair.
Fletcher Tabato.
Thank you, sir. R&D repayment tax equal to the total of the company's R&D loss tax credits for the tax year, corresponding to the restatement year and earlier tax years minus the total amount. And then it explains in detail. It's hard to summarise it because it's so complicated. So with your forbearance, sir, I'll just read out the clause that I think is particularly pertinent, Part A there. The company's terminal tax plus tax credits giving rise to imputation credits minus refundable tax credits giving rise to imputation debits for the tax year and the period beginning with the earliest credit year and ending with the tax year corresponding to the reinstatement year. It's incredibly complicated language, but what I wanted to acknowledge is that that part there does mitigate somewhat New Zealand First's concerns around New Zealand small to medium enterprises being left out. But I do ask the Minister, and I ask this earnestly, if this is what is actually wanted and what subsequent if this is what was actually wanted, what was the subsequent consultation to reaffirm that that was the outcome from this altered clause? Are you getting what you intended from it? Are our small businesses able to benefit from it? So there will be, and then just to finish off, sir, I keep raising the point I have in the past about unintended consequences. Some analysis on this would be hugely helpful. It will be important to understand just how that works in practice. And so perhaps if I just leave my contribution there and wait for my next contribution to be able to talk on another part separately. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to call